What happens when we underestimate the quietest person in the room? When ego meets ancient wisdom. This is not just a story about a billionaire's mistake. It's about dignity that can't be bought, brilliance that doesn't need applause, and a woman the world tried to overlook, until she spoke a language that made history stand still. Stay with us. Because sometimes, the most powerful voices belong to those the world expects to stay silent. And in that silence, they carry storms. She walked like she had secrets. Not the kind people whispered about or gossiped over, but the quiet kind, the kind that came from long journeys, worn books, and 1,000 silent observations. Her name was Amina Yusuf, and to the outside world, she was just a maid. The Alcott mansion was a fortress of marble and ego, stretching across several acres of land like a monument to excess. On that morning, the rising sun filtered through its massive glass windows, casting golden streaks across floors polished to perfection, floors Amina herself had cleaned just hours earlier. The guests had started arriving, senators, tech billionaires, global investors. Laughter and clinking glasses echoed off the high ceilings. Brunch was being served on the west patio. Amina moved among them quietly, setting down plates, refilling juices, collecting used silverware with a grace too precise for someone expected to be invisible. But then again, being invisible had always been her unspoken power. Across the courtyard, Miles Alcott, tall, charismatic, smug, stood with his signature champagne flute in hand. He was mid-story, boasting again about a business deal, his wealth, and his intellect. Miles had inherited everything but insisted he'd earned it all. He was the kind of man who wore tailored humility over layers of entitlement. Amina had seen men like him before. In Paris, in Geneva, in Abuja. All power, no poetry. Then, it happened. He held up a piece of parchment in a gleaming gold frame. Weathered, ancient-looking. "Ladies and gentlemen," Miles announced, "this is one of the rarest artifacts in my collection, an untranslated text from West Africa. Linguists have tried and failed. It's a dead dialect. Lost to time." The crowd leaned in. Miles smirked. "If anyone here can read it, truly read it, I'll give them my monthly salary. No tricks. No gimmicks." A beat of silence. Then he turned. And pointed at Amina. "You there," he said casually, gesturing toward her as if she were a stagehand. "What about you? Care to give it a try?" A few guests chuckled. Amina looked at him. Not with offense. Not with fear. Just stillness. She stepped forward, slowly, and without hesitation read the parchment aloud in a language that hadn't graced that mansion in centuries. Her voice, rich and steady, rolled over the crowd like waves. And just like that, the party stopped. A single sentence. But it held the room hostage. It was a proverb. A tree that forgets its roots is destined to fall in the storm. There was no laughter now. Just stunned silence. Miles blinked. Who was she? The silence after her words wasn't just awkward. It was thunderous. The kind that pulled people inward, into their own discomfort, their own reflection. Miles cleared his throat and gave a forced laugh. "Well, looks like someone just earned a very expensive check." No one laughed with him. Amina gave a respectful nod and quietly resumed collecting the glasses from the nearest table, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just shattered the fragile illusion that status equals superiority. Miles watched her for a long time. His smirk was gone. Something in his stomach twisted, a strange mix of embarrassment, curiosity, and respect. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the sun had dipped below the horizon, Miles sat alone in his office, sipping whiskey he suddenly found less satisfying. The footage from the event replayed on the security monitor beside him. He rewound it again and again, Amina's voice, that language, the way she stood unshaken while he had unknowingly mocked a living monument of knowledge. He tapped the intercom. "Danielle," he said to his assistant. I want everything you can find on Amina Yusuf. Background check. Education. Anything. But do it quietly. Danielle hesitated. She's a maid, Miles. She's not just a maid, he replied, almost to himself. The file. 2 days later, a slim folder landed on his mahogany desk. Inside were scanned certificates, accolades, photographs, and recommendation letters from international aid organizations. Top of her class at Sciences Po in Paris. Linguistic anthropology degree from the University of Ibadan. Translator for the United Nations. Field worker with refugee children in Greece, Yemen, and the Sahel. Miles was stunned. Why would someone like her scrub dishes in his mansion? He stared at a photo clipped inside. A younger Amina, standing between children in a makeshift classroom in Syria, teaching them how to read. Her smile was wide. Her eyes had that same quiet, unshakable strength. Why here? He whispered. Behind her silence. Amina didn't seek pity. She didn't carry her past like a trophy. What few knew was that after her father's death and her mother's illness, she chose to step away from her rising career. The non-profit world praised her, but she was tired. Tired of being put on display as the exceptional African woman. Tired of the politics. Tired of being heard only when others decided she was useful. In a world that applauded her brilliance on paper but dismissed her in person, she craved silence. A break. A reset. Even if it meant serving food instead of speaking at conferences. A knock at her door. That evening, Miles knocked on the staff quarters hallway door for the first time in years. Amina opened it slowly, her expression unreadable. I wanted to apologize, he said, his voice lower than usual. What I did, it was ignorant. Arrogant. You didn't deserve that. Amina waited. I also wanted to ask you something. We're expanding the Alcott Foundation. We're building education and cultural preservation centers in West Africa. I want you to help lead it. Your expertise, your presence, is what we need. She studied him, her gaze sharp. You want me because I embarrassed you in front of your guests? No, he said. I want you because I realized I've been blind to the brilliance right in front of me. She didn't smile. But she didn't shut the door either. I'll think about it, she said. The next morning was different. Miles arrived at the breakfast table earlier than usual. No champagne, no phone in hand. Just a cup of black coffee and silence. His eyes lingered on the empty chair across the kitchen, the one Amina usually passed by without a glance. Today, he noticed it like a missing piece. By noon, he had drafted a formal letter, one of invitation, not obligation. No condescension. No performative praise. Just words that acknowledged her work, her history, and her right to lead something real. He left the envelope on her nightstand, unsigned, because this wasn't about him. Amina found it that evening. She didn't open it right away. She already knew. The decision. 3 days later, she stood in front of the Alcott Foundation's central office. A glass building, all shine and show, but its bones were the same as every institution she'd left behind, performative, impatient, proud. Inside, Miles waited with his board. Suits. Polished shoes. Smiles too wide. Amina walked in, her steps deliberate. I accept, she said. A ripple of polite claps. But she held up her hand. On one condition, she added. This isn't a figurehead role. I choose my team. I set the curriculum. And the work we do will be by and for the communities we claim to serve, not for headlines. Miles nodded. Agreed. Her eyes lingered on him, measuring sincerity. Then she turned to the room. I'm not here to be celebrated. I'm here to rebuild what your systems erased. Roots in motion. Over the next few weeks, Amina moved with force and clarity. She didn't just draft proposals, she built bridges. She traveled. She met with village elders in Senegal, with language historians in Mali, with schoolgirls in Ghana who could still sing in dialects the world claimed were lost. She created programs that taught oral history alongside digital preservation. She paired tech with tradition. She recruited teachers who had been ignored because they didn't have formal degrees, but had lifetimes of knowledge. And everywhere she went, she told the truth. Languages are not dead. They are buried. And we are here to unearth them. Meanwhile, Miles changed too. He watched. He listened. And for once, he led from behind. It wasn't easy. There were board members who resisted. Donors who asked why a Maid was directing policy. Miles silenced them, not with ego, but with accountability. This woman, he said at one meeting, knows more about identity, history, and survival than our entire boardroom combined. If you can't handle that truth, you're welcome to leave. Some did. Most stayed. Because it was working. A new foundation. By year's end, the Alcott Foundation had launched 10 centers across 4 countries. Enrollment tripled expectations. UNESCO reached out. The World Bank asked to collaborate. But for Amina, the real reward was different. One morning in a small classroom in Kano, Nigeria, she watched a young boy recite a poem in Fula, a language thought to be vanishing. His voice cracked with pride. His grandmother wept. That moment, not the headlines, told her she had chosen right. Back in the US, Miles quietly added something new to the mansion, the framed parchment. Beneath it, a plaque. The tree that forgets its roots is destined to fall in the storm. Translated by Amina Yusuf. He placed it not in his trophy room, but in his private library, the room where he learned to listen. Months passed. Not quietly, but meaningfully. The world began to notice. Articles appeared in international papers. Former housekeeper leads linguistic revival movement. The maid who redefined education policy. Headlines stumbled over themselves trying to frame Amina's brilliance without reducing her story to charity or surprise. But Amina ignored the noise. Her work wasn't for applause. Instead, she focused on the stories, the mothers who cried when their children could speak the language of their ancestors. The young women who discovered power in their voices through forgotten proverbs. The elders who wept as they heard dialects they thought had died decades ago now playing from digital recordings. It was more than preservation. It was resurrection. One afternoon in Cape Coast, Ghana, after a workshop on cultural storytelling, Amina sat under a baobab tree with a 94-year-old griot. His voice was raspy, but his memory was sharp. He spoke of battles, births, and rituals long erased from official records. You carry the drum now, he told her. The drum? He smiled. Every people has a drum, the heartbeat of memory. You've kept ours alive. Miles in the shadows. Back in New York, Miles had faded from the spotlight. He still ran the foundation, but Amina was its voice. Its soul. And that suited him. He started volunteering at the community center she helped build in Harlem, teaching digital skills to underprivileged youth. At first, they mocked his soft hands and expensive sneakers. But then he listened. Learned. Laughed. He didn't need to lead anymore. He needed to grow. One evening, as he locked up the center, he found a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the chalkboard. A child had written, Mr. Miles, thanks for seeing us. Not saving us. He stood there for a long time. An unexpected return. A year after Amina had first stunned that brunch crowd, she returned briefly to the Alcott estate. This time, she wasn't in uniform. She wore a deep blue dress and a scarf from her mother's village. As she stepped through the grand entrance, staff and guests alike turned, some out of recognition, others out of reverence. There was a gala. The Foundation's first annual cultural night. The centerpiece of the event wasn't a billionaire, a brand, or a ribbon cutting. It was a 12-year-old girl named Nene who stood trembling behind a mic. She had learned her grandmother's dialect through Amina's program. Now, she recited a blessing in you that none of the guests understood. But Amina did. She smiled, eyes glistening. When Nene finished, the room stood. Not because they understood the words, but because they felt their weight. A shift that endures. As the night ended, Miles approached Amina. He didn't speak immediately. He simply handed her something, a notebook. Hand-bound. Inside, handwritten reflections from students, teachers, and families across every center they had built. I didn't write a speech, he said. They did. She opened it, scanning page after page. Each voice was a seed planted. Each story, a route rediscovered. I hope, he said, you know what you've done. She looked at him, not as an employer, not as a billionaire, but as a man finally learning his place in a much older, richer story. I didn't do it alone, she replied. But I carried the drum. And in that moment, under chandeliers and surrounded by once skeptical eyes, Amina Yusuf stood not as a former maid, not even as a leader, but as a keeper of memory, a builder of bridges, and a woman who helped the world remember its song. 5 years later. What began as a quiet act of linguistic brilliance had grown into a global movement. There were now 41 cultural learning centers spread across Africa, Europe, and North America, each teaching endangered languages, preserving oral histories, and offering cultural literacy programs for children of the diaspora. They called it the Drum Initiative, a nod to the griot's words beneath the baobab tree. Amina never trademarked the name. She said language belonged to the people, not to paperwork. One foggy morning in Johannesburg, a group of children crowded around a table, listening to an audio recording of a lullaby in Khoisan. Their teacher, a soft-spoken Kenyan woman, explained that this was likely the first time the melody had been heard in a classroom. Meanwhile, in Toronto, a former corporate executive used the center's resources to learn her grandmother's Cree dialect, then created a podcast to teach others. In Dakar, elders once afraid their dialects would die with them now mentor teenagers, guiding them not only through language but through story, ancestry, and identity. The world hadn't just remembered its song. It was singing it again. The Smithsonian Call. When the Smithsonian Institution called, Amina nearly declined. She wasn't interested in museums or awards. But they didn't want to honor her. They wanted to archive with her. Together, they created the largest multilingual oral history archive in the world, digitized, translated, and free to the public. On opening night, the hall was filled with the hum of whispers in dozens of languages. Amina stood near the entrance, overwhelmed not by the size of the achievement, but by its intimacy. Each whisper was someone's grandmother. Someone's buried memory. Miles was there, of course. He wore a simple suit, no tie. He spent most of the evening listening to stories from families who had traveled across oceans to attend. In the final hour, Amina recorded her own story, not of being a maid, but of being a daughter, a student, a woman who had once felt invisible until the language within her was seen. She titled it, The Drum and the Whisper. Amina's final lesson. Years passed. Amina never stopped working. She became an advisor to the UN on cultural preservation. She helped rewrite policy. But mostly, she sat with people, listening, asking, archiving. She never sought the camera. Never wanted the credit. And when she passed, quietly in her sleep at 76, the world did something unusual. They paused. From Accra to Atlanta, Cape Town to Chicago, people gathered in classrooms, living rooms, and temples. They lit candles. They played voice recordings. Children recited blessings in languages their ancestors once feared to speak. And in Harlem, at the center she helped build, there was a mural, bright, bold, defiant. It showed Amina walking barefoot on a trail of letters, each step releasing birds shaped like characters from dying scripts. Beneath the image, a single sentence. She taught us how to carry the drum. Epilogue, the whisper lives on. Nene, the young girl who once trembled at the gala mic, became a linguist. She now directs the main center in Accra, and every year she opens the season with the same ritual, one voice, one forgotten word, spoken to a crowd that listens with reverence. Sometimes, people ask her if Amina was a savior. She always replies, no. Amina was a mirror. She showed us what we already had. And somewhere, beneath a virtual archive that spans continents, in a digital file labeled simply 001, Amina's voice still plays. Language is not just sound. It is memory. It is dignity. It is resistance. It is home. And that whisper, that heartbeat, will never fade.